some questions that we put together. I used ChatGPT to help with some of them, just to kind of get a feel, and ran those past these guys, and they added some. I think we probably have more questions that we'll have time for, but they can stay a little bit.
Certainly more questions than answers. Right?
Well, yeah, right now, for sure. So I'd like to introduce Joe Carbonara. Everybody probably knows him. He's a Grand Poobah editor at Zumba Group for FES and Restaurant Plus Design. And then Dan Hartline is with Antunes. Previously, he was the president of the company, and he decided to throw that all away to hit the road. And he works remotely now. He and his wife are traveling around and visiting family and friends, and he is the chief technology executive at Antunes now. And I think you're going to have a fascinating time. So, take it away, guys.
Thanks, Gary. And thanks to Forbes, Haber, and Wallace for hosting the first annual AI support group meeting for the food service industry. The first step is admitting you have an AI problem, and now we're going to go through the other 8 steps, 11 steps. I can't wait till we make amends for all the mistakes you're going to make with technology as you move forward. But I'm Joe Carbonara. I am the editor of Food Service Equipment Supplies magazine. And Dan, why don't you tell the people a little bit about yourself?
So I'm a self-proclaimed geek. I'm an engineer by training who happened to wander into executive level jobs for the last 20 years. Come from industry. I work for a company called ABB, which is one of the leading companies in the robotic space. If you ever see a video on a GM car being put together, you'll see ABB robots doing that assembly. So I have a different background in that I've been in this space for 7 years, but I spent the rest of my career somewhere else where these things were perhaps more commonplace. And I'll also share that when I came into the industry, looking at where the state of the industry using some of this really proven technology, this stuff has been around for, I've just shared a little while ago that I did my first distributed control system at a power plant in 1986. I just dated myself. Some of you probably weren't around in 1986. But this technology is proven, it's mature, we just have to figure out how to use it. And then there's the advancing side of this, which is evolving really quickly in the world of AI. And that's going to be an exciting topic. Hang on, it's here, it's real, it's going to change how we do things. The question we have to ask is, how is it going to affect this industry? How is it going to change what we're doing? As an add-on comment to that, throw a little quantum computing into that, and that's 10 years from now, that computer is 1,000,000 times stronger and faster than what you're using today. So 10 years from now, we'll be operating computers that are 1,000,000 times faster potentially. Maybe it's 15 years. And we've got this thing of the computer learning by itself. What's that going to do? It's going to unlock potential solutions to things like cancer. It's going to change how we understand the cosmos. It's going to change everything about our lives, and it's not going away. Okay, so how we use all of this in our industry and in our space today, really interesting question, and so I hope we can explore that together a little bit.
Yeah, it's a topic that's evolving very quickly. Ever since, was it Hanna-Barbera who introduced us to Rosie the Robot with the Jetsons back in the 60s? We've all been, society has been sitting around waiting for that robotic kitchen, the robotic, domestic assistant, flying cars, all that sort of stuff. And it's been slow to come. And it's been slow to come for a variety of reasons. Now we're piqued by our interest in AI and IoT and all those sorts of things and how it can affect the food service industry. And really, to Dan's point, we're really just at the tip of the iceberg here.
Right.
I mean, the surface has barely been scratched. And I think there's a long runway to come and a lot more potential for the industry, for the industry moving forward. And Dan, to get this kind of conversation going, I think one of the first questions I'd like to ask you is that how do you see, AI and IoT technologies helping food service operators enhance the customer experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one of the things I want to differentiate here a little bit, because the words, the terms, the jargon, if you will, gets used interchangeably pretty quickly, okay? So maybe just a little bit of level setting here for what we mean when we talk about data analytics, when we talk about IoT, which is closely connected to data analytics, and we talk about AI and automation, that next stage. So the fundamental difference is we can do a lot today without AI, which is really truly data analytics, okay? And we're taking massive amount of data and we're modeling that data in today's computers, and we're able to come up with a predictive model, which is really good, right? So we take all that data and we can do things with that data to say, how are you going to behave tomorrow? Okay, how are you going to behave right now? And that in the kitchen, we've seen some deployment of that, and some of it's been described as AI, and it's really, in my mind, it's not. Okay, that's an overstatement. People are mixing terms. But data analytics, for example, McDonald's did some research, and they actually bought a company which was called an AI company, and perhaps they have AI capability, but this application really wasn't. What they were doing is they were geofencing, they were trending data by customer at the drive-through, and they were using that data to drive an upsell to the customer. That was the plan, right? They've since sold that company, but I believe, because they said, that's really not who we are, but I believe that they also are still using this technology. The idea is, let's just say that you've got a sweet tooth. On particular days, you have a propensity to buy their caramel sundae, okay? And so if it's a sunny day and it happens to be a Tuesday and it's between the hours of 4 and 6, you buy the caramel sundae. And they happen to know that. Now, that's data, right? And the data says, okay, Mr. Customer, you bought that. Guess what? I got a special sale just for you. Would you like to add your caramel sundae to that? And I'll give you 25 cents off today. Boom, done. That's an upsell, right? So they're using the data and the technology that's available right now in order to understand their customer at that level and then deal with that customer's buying patterns for the best interest of the restaurant, right? So that's a good example of where data is being used. The AI piece of that, if I can go a little bit further, actually allows the model to improve over time. Okay, so one might be data. The other is, oh my gosh, I'm paying attention to the weather patterns, to the local football league schedule, to the band concerts in the area, to all the information available in the internet, and I'm actually changing the model as I go. So now my ability to be predictive and influential to that customer's buying decisions has just even improved, and the computer did that by themselves, okay? So that's a difference between a data analytics model and an AI model, where the AI is actually the learning portion of that, right? Models got the freedom to go make itself even faster, stronger, better, right? So there's a difference.
Yeah, the I in AI stands for intelligence. So as it learns more about what your business, the operator's business is and what they're doing, it's able to apply more. Exactly. I think data analytics is probably the lowest hanging fruit, I think, within the industry to really drive improvement. In those examples, if anybody has the Starbucks app, I think they do a really good job with that. Because if you ever notice, like they'll say, okay, Katie, it's Double Stars Tuesday for you, and they're going to put in there in that email you get is 3 pictures of the last 3 things you ordered. Right? So it's a breakfast sandwich, it's a Frappuccino, and it's something else. And if you go in and order one of those sorts of things on this day, we're going to give you double stars. So they're using the information that you've given them, which really is kind of baseline stuff. I've ordered this. They know that you like this. Come and buy something you like again, and we're going to drive more sales. So I think one of the things that we see is that operators just aren't mining that data effectively. And I think when you translate that into it helps operators, I think, operate more effective and more efficiently. We are seeing more tests or rollouts of voice AI in drive-thrus. And what that does is they're using that to start collecting, drive-through orders. And what that does is it doesn't eliminate necessarily the need for another person, but that person is then focused on serving customers better because they're helping, gather the order, they're making sure the drinks are filled, they're making sure things are moving along properly. So I think that technology can really help with I think making more effective and efficient use of the labor you have. I think the other thing too is that if you're using IoT, if you're using some of the data that you're able to collect, operators have been really reluctant to share data about their equipment. If they're able to do that with service agents, I think a little bit more, service agents can get a little bit smarter about how they're working with operators to keep their equipment up and running. Having that information, I think, really goes a long way.
And to tag on to that, raise your hand if you're a restaurant operator in the room. You guys are in the kitchens? Okay. So you guys know the service model is not at its best place in history, right? It's a challenge, right? Getting somebody to come in and fix a piece of equipment that you need to service your customers has become more difficult, right? Well, picture a time when that service model, when that piece of equipment is communicating with the service agent, and it's not only doing that, it's doing self-diagnostic. So it knows that, hey, I'm about to have a problem, okay? My wife always knows the answer to that. But in a piece of equipment, the equipment now reaches out to the service agent, and it says, there's these 7 pieces of equipment in your territory that are all about to have an issue. So here's the optimum routing for you to be the most efficient in getting to those 7 sites. These 7 have already signed on to your service agreement, your service level agreement. By the way, this is happening in industry today. These 7 are already part of your deal. Here's the optimum routing, and here's the parts you need on your truck. How many times do you pay a service engineer who shows up to diagnose, drives 2 hours back from your restaurant to their warehouse, or waits for the next day for parts down to ship them one, and they come back with that information in order to do the repair that they should have been armed to do at the moment? That's a perfect example of that data analytics. Now, the AI portion of that would say, not only that, okay, but I'm looking at what's happening across the network, and Partstown is working on this today. I'm looking at the whole U.S. market, and I am suggesting that this is the inventory you need to carry because these are the trends. The model is telling, buy this, buy that, keep this on the shelf, you're going to need it. And it becomes really effective. And so that service portion of it gets much more efficient because of these tools.
And the service agent's happier because it's a more efficient use of their time. They don't want to roll, am I telling tales out of school here, Katie? I mean, they don't want to roll a truck to the same place twice. I mean, if you can have that tech show up there with the part, knowing what he or she needs to do and ready to roll from the first visit, it's a faster visit. They don't have to go back, and then and that means you're able to get farther down the line to other people that need your help.
And by the way, guys, this can be a dialogue, okay? So I think Joe and I discovered as we've gotten to know each other, we could talk for hours, both of us. So jump in. If there's a question, comment, something you're hearing or you want to add to the conversation, please do, okay? So let's make this, please.
Yeah, I had a question.
Yep.
Sunday. How would they gather data online based on your phone with the app, like geotagging?
Yep. That's exactly how they do it.
And I would imagine that really intelligence is set up their system now. They're not the only ones. They have some sort of automated message information to everybody. You want to try this new whatever. But now if they see you pop in there, why would it be customizable through AI to say Caramel Sundays on sale? Would you like that?
Exactly. And again, that's a data play per se. The AI portion of that would be it's learning more and more and more about your behavior because your end user license agreement on TikTok have allowed them to do that. And so they're learning more and more and more about how you live and what you're doing and what your buying trends are relative to your patterns.
It should have with labor, though, because you don't have to necessarily train everybody to always be willing to ask that with like X with it. You've got a human sounding voice.
Yeah,
for sure.
Sales pitch is something they already like.
Sure.
Well, and that's where that's where the intelligence part of artificial intelligence comes in. It has that similar potential. We all have our favorite bar or coffee shop or whatever we go through, and there's a bar around the corner from my house. And when they walk in, they know exactly what flavor of Pabst I like, and they put it down in the bar for me, right? Well, AI has that ability over time to be able to see, Carrie just walked in. Hey, Carrie, last time you ordered, it was a double shot, espresso. Is that what you want again? They have that ability to do it through the things, voice recognition, geotagging, all that sort of stuff when they start connecting it.
We did some work with Kroger Corporation. We actually bought a company that was related to Kroger in the IoT and data analytics front. That was kind of our foray into some of those things. And we were visiting the Kroger Innovation Center, which is in Cold Spring, Kentucky. It's really a cool store. I mean, they do some amazing things. So some of their applications are probably noteworthy here. One of the things they did is they're reading facial expressions to understand customer satisfaction and frustration and reacting to their staffing at the counters, at the checkout areas. With the goal is to get rid of checkout, which they may have accomplished by now, but they were actually reading facial expressions. Now, there's an interesting story here that they shared, that their pharmacy was tracking metrics from the time the prescription came across the counter to the time it was filled. That's how they were measuring their pharmacy. And all their metrics said, we're killing it, we're fast. I had 20 people standing in line getting ticked off. You've all been there. Whether it's a Walgreens, I don't care, you've stood in that line, right? And so what they realized was we're measuring the wrong thing, and they did that by cameras. They were actually reading, and that's AI, reading people's expressions and understanding that we got a problem here. So we think we're killing it, and our customers think we stink. And they caught that with video intellect. The other thing they did is on their app is that as people came in the store, they started to use their inventory on their expensive products, ribeye steaks, okay? So I'm sorry I didn't catch your name. Chad. So Chad, you love ribeye steaks and you buy 4 of them when you're there. Guess what? In that store, those steaks aren't cut until you walk in the door. They don't know you're going to buy it that day, but they know you bought it last Tuesday and you bought it the 7 Tuesdays before that. They're willing to take that risk and not wasting protein. This model applies to restaurants, absolutely. How much food do we throw away, and how much of that is costing us our income at the end of the day? It's massive, right? So that's a great, and this was, I'm looking at my team members here 5 years ago that they were already there, okay, doing that. So now I talk about this stuff's mature, it's there, we're already doing this, let's apply it to the kitchen, right? How do we do that? So that's a great example.
I think it's also important to understand demographics and understand customer expectations when they're working when they're coming through certain places. Grocery stores, that's a great example for grocery stores. Grocery stores are extremely transactional. QSRs, extremely transactional. Where's the area we're seeing this most right now? It's within QSRs. Because they're extremely transactional. If I take my wife out for a nice dinner, to celebrate our anniversary or something like that, probably don't want it to be super transactional. So maybe you may have to finesse. I'm not saying it doesn't belong there,
right.
But you have to finesse maybe how that kind of goes.
Or the use might be hidden from the customer.
Correct.
Might be in the background.
Because you don't want to take away the warmth of the hospitality. Yeah. You want to leverage that technology, to Dan's point, to emphasize the warmth. Look at senior living, for example. My mother's 83, and she's not in senior living yet. But if my mom had to interact with any of that artificial or computer sort of stuff, every other week I get the phone call that the computer broke again, and that she needs something new. So I think you have to just kind of understand that demographic of who they are, why they're using you, and how they're working with you. And it doesn't say it doesn't fit there. You just have to understand, like you said, it could be more behind the scenes.
We've seen with ChatGPT.
Yep.
There's hope for your mother's situation because she'll be able to talk to that machine very soon, right? And in a normal, natural language processing way, it's going to be conversational, right? Now, that still may freak out some people, but this is going to become easier to adapt. I was thinking as you were talking about this element, there is a QSR chain that won't do this as it relates to the customer side, but they are collecting data as it relates to the transactions. And I'm looking at Ron because I think he knows exactly what I'm going, but who is that? Who do you guys think that is? Exactly. Chick-fil-A will not take that customer experience away. It's too much of who they are. But make no bones about it, they're sophisticated both in automation development as well as AI deployment in the future. It's just always going to be delivered to a person, okay? And that's their standard, yes.
Let me
Sure.
repeat that before you.
Yeah.
So the question was, can we go over some of the components that would be needed for data analytics and for implementing AI?
Right. So some of those are technical, and some of those fall into the human side, and some of those become business issues. Okay. So the technical infrastructure, one of the biggest challenges in our space from a hardware infrastructure perspective is we do not have a standard yet, okay? So every time we connect a piece of equipment, very easy to connect a piece of equipment. At Antunes, we build, mostly countertop cooking equipment, and we've moved into automation. But we have a chip that we've designed. That chipset is your radio. It communicates with Wi-Fi. It's a processor. It's everything we need in order to have anything we make connectable. Okay, we have that today. The challenge is every customer has a different communication standard that now then we have custom programming to do to connect the toaster. Okay, if you take your home, okay, and Alexa and Google Assistant and by the way, I love that stuff. I mentioned I'm a geek. I think it's really cool. You can see that. You can see my kitchen if you want. But it's what happens there is because there were a couple of powerful players that became obvious choices in Amazon and Google, and they went to the same place. We ended up with a home standard. There's a home standard, everybody connects to it, right? And in truth, there's a couple, but they all play well together. That's kind of what's happened. In the restaurant place, we haven't done that yet. And NAFM has looked at, should we be creating this NAFM protocol? How do we do this? And so the efficiency of getting to data collection really needs a standard. And what we're doing is we're adopting standards that came out of the home environment because we think those are likely to win. And so we're kind of trying to develop stuff there and then hand this connected piece of equipment under this protocol, okay? And then there's Wi-Fi and all that. I mentioned the human and business side, okay? So the architecture, the hardware, that question of standard communication protocol is a big one. The human side or the business side of this contemplates whose data is it, okay? It raises that question. So if I'm a franchisee in a network of, just pick your brand. I'll use Burger King this time. I used McDonald's before. If I'm a franchisee at Burger King, and I've got 100 stores, so I'm on my own right. I'm a big company, right? I'm doing several $100 million of revenue, and I'm going to share data to make the whole corporation better. Am I? How do I get compensated for that? Whose data is it? And I haven't seen a franchise agreement yet that contemplates that. And I had a conversation with a large franchisee years ago who said, I'm not giving that away for nothing. You know, it's a little bit us and them in that franchise world sometimes, right? So I'm not going to give that away for nothing. They got to compensate. Why would I do that? So there's some really interesting dynamics and challenges in that larger QSR frame. Then you take that to say, okay, so who are the early adopters in any of this technology? In the QSR side, it's the corporations that have a large percentage of corporate-owned stores or perhaps a different business model. So corporate-owned stores, now the corporation can dictate, they can say, this is what we're doing, this is our data, we're operating this way. C-stores, okay? Very well connected. Don't think the fuel pumps haven't been connected for 30 years. They have. That's how they do pricing. That's how they react to oil price changes. C-stores are very good at this, typically, okay? QSR, on the other hand, hasn't contemplated this. They've got agreements that don't address it, and there's some big issues to be sorted out on the business side. So you've got the hardware infrastructure questions, and then you've got the business infrastructure questions. And they both have to be solved for this to really move forward. On a local, if I were a single restaurant operator or I had 2 or 3 and I'm not one of these bigger players, I would really look to advise that you look to the residential protocols that have come out and start to move in that direction. Because there's many things you can do with off-the-shelf stuff you can buy on Amazon today that start to move in that direction. That gives you a protocol, gives you communication, gives you a place to start collecting data. Okay, so that would be my advice there.
And I think also take a look at the chains. Each chain is a little bit different in terms of how it works as you run. So for example, you look at Chick-fil-A. You mentioned Chick-fil-A, or look at Culver's. They want you to open 1 or 2 restaurants. They don't want you to open a lot. So you're not necessarily gathering a ton of data across many locations. Contrast that with Dunkin'. Dunkin' wants you to open 25, 30, 40, grow to 100 as fast as you can. They want you to get to as many units in there. So the level of the franchisee that they're attracting can be a little bit different. The amount of data that's available there tends to be a little bit different. And then go to the complete opposite end of the conversation where you're looking at something like Chipotle or White Castle, which are all company owned. They're not franchised whatsoever. Most of Starbucks are, all company owned. They're going to be able to push some of that stuff a little bit faster out into their system because there isn't any franchise friction.
Yep.
And I think the other thing too that you have to look at, broadening the conversation from just chains, it's easy to talk about chains because they're the ones that are kind of driving the bus on this at the moment. But I think that there's a lot of, we have school food service in here. I know colleges and everybody else is trying to figure out how to use it as well. And that data conversation, I think, is really important because when you look at it, data is the big concern. NAFTA data protocol has been around for over 20 years, but it's not used that much for a variety of different reasons. Not because it isn't good, but we still have manufacturers that do things a little bit differently. If you're looking on the chains, they have different franchisee requirements that they want, so the franchisees may or may not be engaged on it. And I think the other thing is look at, when you go into non-commercial, look at their restrictions around data. Healthcare is extremely tight. Food services, when two healthcare systems merge, food services probably doesn't get integrated until 4 or 5 years after the merger happens because it's such a low priority. But they have to be careful because if they're doing room service and there's that access to the patient and data, all that HIPAA stuff really makes it very tight. So it really depends, I think, on the operator, their approach to data, and that sort of thing. And Dan, I'd love your perspective. Like, what's going to be the tipping point? Because we're collecting lots of data. There's a ton of service agents have data. Operators have data. There's a ton of data that's out there. What's the tipping point where we start actually leveraging this data to not only make better analytical decisions, but also to feed the beast, to feed the AI beast? Because AI is not going to work without data.
Yeah, I think the tipping point is the business case, right? And it's probably going to show up differently depending on the organization, its values, its business proposition. So you in the education space are going to probably embrace that differently than somebody running a large QSR chain. You are. But I think the tipping point is when we get enough momentum in the industry with a protocol A or protocol B or protocol C, that now that becomes the obvious choice for others considering it because it's easy. And we just haven't quite gotten to that point yet. I think when we get to the point where there's enough of this happening, you'll suddenly get the Google, Amazon, smart home revolution that took 10 years to happen. But it'll go really quickly once we start to get some common protocols, okay? And back to the whole data ownership question in Chick-fil-A, one of the things Chick-fil-A has done, they have a very different business structure in that they own all of the equipment in the restaurant. The franchisee does not. That is a tremendous advantage in this arena, okay? So again, they don't own the local business, but they own all the capital. And so they can deal with those things. We had some experience with them in terms of the speed at which they were interfacing with their equipment. And there's two different rates. It's 2.4 gigahertz and a 5. And so the easy thing to do is to say, oh, well, 5's better than 2.4. And with a lot of EMF interference and things, it actually is. Okay, it travels better. But the problem with it is it's also where Amazon and Google and all the video streaming that you could ever dream of is operating at those bandwidths. And so supply chain, suddenly you as big as Chick-fil-A is, they're competing for components with Amazon and Google and Apple and everybody else. You don't want to be there. That's the wrong spot. And 2.4 is good enough, right? So they actually were able to move their standard pretty quickly because of that supply chain challenge. I saw a question in the back. There is no crazy in this part of the world. So.
Oh, no, not right now.
Yeah.
We'll go back. If you want to talk about crazy, we'll go back to the conversation about my mom.
Yeah. Oh, we can talk about mine, which we're both blessed to have.
Right? Exactly. Sure. I'll repeat it.
Okay.
Were you watching the same newscast I was this morning, where they were talking about how, they're bringing suit against social media companies right now because of the environment that TikTok and Facebook and Instagram are creating, and it brings what you're speaking to is the bigger question about what are the ethical and safety concerns around the data that's being collected today? Because that was on a couple of different news networks today. So, Dan, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's William, right? It's a great question, William. Thank you. And so, again, I mentioned it's coming. It's going to happen. Can't stop it. I believe that. Okay. Dealing with, and there's a lot of press today. Elon Musk gets on an airplane, flies somewhere to Europe to participate in, is AI going to be an Armageddon? Is it going to take over? Are we going to see, what's the movie? No, well, Terminator's 1. I was actually thinking of where the bodies are in the cocoons and the Matrix. I was thinking of the Matrix. The Matrix movies, which I think are really cool. But anyway, I digress. So all of this has consequences. Consequences, in my mind, are value-based. Okay? So is that a good consequence or is that a bad consequence? Provided people are actively engaging in that question, in that dialogue, I don't, the idea, so ChatGPT, I read this the other day. The CEO, founder of ChatGPT, who has been thrown out recently by his board, may have been hired back because everybody was about to leave. He has a kill switch. He's got the nuclear football for that infrastructure in his briefcase. Okay? That's their safety protocol. And I understand from the article I read, there's 3 of them. So ChatGPT is shut off remotely by this guy, should that ever happen. They're thinking about this stuff. That's kind of spooky, when I read that. It's kind of spooky. But getting back to the value-based judgment and the values of consequences, you could argue that McDonald's upselling a caramel sundae is not a healthy thing for them to be doing, right? You can argue that. There's a debate to be held around that. Maybe that debate leads to, well, if you're a health nut, why are you in that drive-through line anyway, right? Okay, so there's all sorts of value judgment, and I'm not trying to pick on their menu. They actually have one of the cleanest menus in the country, just in case this thing gets published. So they do. They have a very clean menu. They've worked hard to clean up their menu as it relates to preservatives and things. But yet we're going to have those questions. Is this a good or a bad thing? Is this neutral? I think as long as humans are making those judgment decisions, the risk is greatly mitigated. Okay? The risk of this going wrong as it relates to bringing it into food services is greatly mitigated. You could argue on the other side, my wife is God bless her, very healthy eater. She has an autoimmune that she believes has been connected to some of the chemicals in our diet. She's a very healthy eater. I benefit from that. Okay? Now, I'm not as disciplined, but anyway, that's a whole other story. She, might, in that same upselling opportunity, get offered a healthy option because that's her habit. That's her tendency. So we can quickly look and say, the caramel, type 2 diabetes, that's not a good answer. But the healthy side could be. And what if then the parameters around AI, I'm going back to our cafeteria, school, right? Well, kids eat healthy. That's I think we all agree to that, right? If you don't agree, kids should eat healthy, raise your hand. No. But now what we might be able to do is to say, hey, that particular child will eat this protein and not this one. Or they will eat this healthy dessert before they grab the apple pie. And in that case now, aren't we able to envision an AI model that is learning about the population it's feeding and actually moving them to healthier choices? That'd be a home run in the school system, I would think, right? So you've got that. There's a lot of good public information. You're helping the kids. You're actually no longer considering ketchup a vegetable. Sorry. But this is what we're doing. We're moving people in the direction that we as a society agree is right. So the fact that this has to have some nefarious negative outcome, I think is, no, these tools are just as positive, driving what we value-based humans will determine is a plus. Now, you get into the word, I think the right way to pronounce it is sentience, right? If you read the literature, sentience is our awareness, our ability to make judgment calls. That's when a computer becomes sentient. It is actually making judgments. Now, in my mind, if we hand that value-based decision-making over to the computer, oops, that's a mistake, because they'll never be humans, okay? But if we are using this as a tool to accomplish the objectives and goals that we hold as valuable, it all comes down to that value-based judgment. Hopefully that answered your question. Yeah. This is a rabbit hole, but
there's a lot of
but go with me. Right. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Was he pointing at us?
I think,
Yeah.
yeah.
Just an example, you triggered a thought, okay? And many people don't know this. One company owns 95% of the workout apps that are on your iPhone or your Android phone. One company. And that company is Under Armour. Okay? So don't think this isn't already happening. You know, you go for a jog, you're tracking your miles, you're tracking your eating, you're putting your food into the eating habit, all that. That's already being consolidated and controlled and manipulated and becoming action-oriented by one company. Okay? That's an old data point, so that may have wandered a little bit, but, you know, 3-4 years ago, that was a true statement. Okay? So be aware, this is already here. It's not going away. How do we use it to increase success? How do we use it to become part of the revolution as opposed to a victim of it, in my mind? Okay?
Yeah, and they're using it. You know, you have to. They're probably going to need guardrails in place to make sure they're using it for good and not evil. I mean, for lack of a better way of saying it, data is. It's a tremendous opportunity for this industry and for any industry, for that matter, to really elevate experience, capacity, really kind of free people up to do more and interesting things. I mean, there's a lot of potential for data, AI, the whole 9 yards. You know, but by the same token, if we're using it for evil and not good, then we have bigger. We're opening ourselves up to some bigger problems.
And I think people have to define that line. As long as the computer isn't defining the difference between evil and good, we're in a safe spot. If the computer starts to do that, that concerns me. But if we're making the decision as humans, you and I are going to differ. I mean, we're going to make a different decision on the same thing, what's good and bad, right? We're going to be different people. But as long as that's a human element, this doesn't scare me. If that becomes a computer element, then I think that's a mistake.
Yeah. Carrie?
Well, and you may have covered it and stepped out, but this has come up in a lot of conversations, the shift in labor and what that's going to look like. I know one of you guys even mentioned that Fessa was talking about that. But how the shift in labor is going to, you know, we're not going to get rid of people, obviously, but the person doing one job now is going to have to shift when, you know, whatever it's automation first or data analytics right before you what.
Well, I'll jump in and
Sure, please.
And then
You want to
can-
repeat the question? Oh,
Yeah.
They probably heard it.
The question is about labor. So, and what role will this have with labor? I think the biggest issue that we've seen, and I'll go to an example, a robotics example. There's a robotic coffee concept that a hospital in Ohio put in. And when I was interviewing the food service director there, I said, well, how many full-time employees do you think this will replace? And she goes, well, I'm going to stop you there. It's not going to replace any. She goes, I've been here for 8 years, and we've never been 100% staffed. So what this is allowing us to do is it's allowing us to take and make more effective and efficient use of the labor we do have. they're automating some processes, and they're able to provide a more premium coffee product to their employees around the clock, which is a big thing in a hospital environment. I think the same thing applies whether it's in a school food service environment or QSR or anywhere else. If you're using this correctly, you're not taking away from the employees that you have. You're making more effective and efficient use of labor. It goes to if they're able to if voice AI, for example, is able to take the order through the drive-through, or if the artificial intelligence is able to help the other scheduling, the other software that they have is able to help with scheduling and sequencing orders. There's a concept, for example, there's a fast-growing coffee concept up in Wisconsin where you order a cup of coffee on your phone and then you drive up. It's a whole robotic thing. And it senses that it takes about a minute to make the cup of coffee. So it senses, Carrie, that you're a minute 20 away. It starts making your coffee. So then when you pull up, you scan your QR code and like the little bank teller window opens up and you grab your coffee. And whether it's a drip coffee or a decaf mint mocha with almond milk, which is I know how you roll on a Wednesday, they have all that stuff in there. So it's really helping them do great things with labor. And I think it by taking some of that processing the transaction, a couple of the industrial engineers I've talked to are saying that managing the customer part can be up to 25 or 30% of a transaction. So you're allowed to take that and apply it elsewhere, and I think be more effective.
Yeah, just to add a couple of thoughts there, and agree with everything you said. The U.S. economy does better over time with efficiency. So, we're in a global competitive market. We have to be able to compete with very, very different business models, very different government structures, very different financial structures around the world. And ultimately, the lifestyle that we enjoy here is driven by none other than an efficient economy. The question we have to ask is, how do we get there, right? What does that look like? And I think there's a lot of variables in that discussion, okay? So there's a business case today for automation, which is driven around, really enhanced, if you will, by increasing minimum labor costs, okay? By the absence of labor, the decision to open a restaurant during certain hours is being affected. You see that. We're open in this core time. We're no longer open in the evenings because can't get people, right? You see that in retail. And so to the extent that that's not good for the overall efficiency, there's a business case today with local government and federal government policies that are creating the case for some of these things, okay, which is the labor issue. As the U.S. middle class grows, the propensity to do some of these jobs shrinks. Okay? We're not alone in that. I lived in Switzerland for 4 years a while ago. 25% back then of the Swiss labor was a legal immigrant pool of labor who would do, you get a service person in Switzerland, if you're in Zurich or something, they're not Swiss, okay? They're not. Swiss don't want to do those jobs, okay? And nor do they have to, okay? So you end up with a question that says, okay, so the business case today, under these conditions, you've got all these issues. You change that tomorrow if you find a way to bring the people that want to be in here legally and make them available to people to hire. That changes tomorrow. That business case changes drastically. Okay, so not to venture into anything that looks like a political conversation, I'll try to stay out of that. But the point is that there are jobs in this country that as we've grown as a middle class and as we've grown as a population of wealth on a global scale that we don't want to do. So who's going to do it? Yeah. You've got a couple of choices. One is find a way to bring in the people that would love those jobs, who frankly we'd benefit from them being here. Or two, build a machine to do it.
Yep.
And it really kind of boils down to that. And depending on those geopolitical forces will determine the pace at which this stuff is both necessary and cost effective. You're going to, you take a restaurant that has a $250,000 package in their kitchen to open that restaurant, and you add $250,000 in automation to it, okay? That only works if that other problem isn't solved. So I can't tell you how fast that's going to be embraced. There are other reasons for doing this technology, okay? So if it's not a labor savings game, because we've taken that problem away, which I think we could as a country, then it becomes, why else do I do it? What's good about automation, okay? How about repeatability? How about accuracy, okay? If you go to our website and look at our automation products, you'll find a video of a machine that this young man back here, Chad, raise your hand.
Farmer
Okay.
Chad.
Chad was the lead engineering manager on the project. We built a prep line for the Golden Arches. It was a proof of concept investment that made every sandwich on their menu in about 4 seconds. Okay, not people free, but certainly people reduced. But there were other things that were really interesting to them. I bet it's the first time McDonald's consistently did change orders correctly. Okay, their data would say that might be the first time that happened, right? So, and that's not a shot at McDonald's. It's the fact that we're using 16-year-old labor to build a custom menu, right? And so, you know, we've met with Whataburger on these things, and Whataburger has a challenge just to use a Texas chain. They have a challenge with how variable they're willing to let their menu be, right? So, frankly, that's solvable in a machine. That's really easy. Point of sale comes in and says, I want light ketchup, medium mustard, no lettuce, heavy onions. Done. And it's done right, right? I can use visual systems to look at that and say, hey, not only did the machine tell me I did it right on a feedback loop, but, you know, I inspected, it's right, boom, go. Here you go, Ms. Customer. You got exactly what you want, okay? And so there's all sorts of other reasons that consistency, that waste of product and food, the labor savings is a piece of it. But the other thing I think you have to remember, sorry I'm rambling here, but the labor savings piece is only good if the labor savings removes a body from the restaurant. How many of your processes actually do that? Because every kitchen I've ever been in, everybody working in there has got 6 things to do at different moments. So I automate one of them. Still need a person for the other 5.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dan brings up a great point. We actually have a blog on our website right now. One of the industrial engineers that blogs for us just wrote this. But the conversation is, what are your minimum staffing levels? What do you need 3 people, for example, to keep the restaurant open in the slowest of times? The only way you realize labor savings is if you're able to take a full person off that schedule, right? That's the whole thing that you have to be able to do. And oftentimes in a lot of these things, we're not really, you have to hit a certain point in terms of sales, in terms of volume and number of transactions and that sort of thing to get to that level where you're able to remove a full person off of the schedule. And I don't want to be too self-promotional here, but if you guys, I would go to our website, festmag.com, or give me your card.
After you're at ours.
Yeah, go to theirs and just to point some of that out, because I think that's a really important thing. But I think in addition to the availability of labor, one of the reasons that this hasn't happened, right, we haven't gone farther into this, is that right now, for the most part, labor's been cheaper than the investment that had to be made. It was always more plentiful, and it was always cheaper. Things are happening in California, Chicago, New York, other areas where government's getting involved. And I'm not being political one way or the other. This is observational. In Chicago, the unions have gotten going, and they've worked with the government to raise the sub-minimum wage to a certain point now. So now you're talking like that floor that a QSR worker can get made, and that the QSR worker can get paid has been raised significantly. Now we've done it in fine dining. That's only going to drive cost up. At some point, that the cost of implementing the technology and the cost of the employee, the technology is going to become a little bit cheaper, and that'll change that. But we're not, I don't think, quite there yet. I think the other thing to be aware of is changing demographics and changing customer perception at day parts. I think that's a huge thing. I'm old. We all grew up, we ate breakfast at 7. we ate breakfast at, thank you. We're gonna record that and play it for my kids. But you ate breakfast at 8, you ate lunch at noon, and then you ate dinner at 5. And that's what it was. And life was really defined around consistent day parts. Things were kind of drifting away from that a little bit prior to the pandemic. Now it's blown up. There are no traditional day parts, particularly for these younger generations that are becoming greater influences, I think, in terms of restaurant spend. So now what happens is you may see a good spike around breakfast time. But what's happening is that the valley that comes after what might be considered the traditional breakfast time, and if you're looking at QSRs or C-stores and that sort of thing, that valley isn't as low as it once was. You're seeing a lot more activity around mid-morning, a little bit of a bump around lunch, but then when that comes back down, it's not, again, the valley isn't as deep, and we're going longer. And now what we're seeing too, there's been a whole bunch of places like Placer AI, Circana, and a few others have talked about the comeback of late night dining amongst QSRs. Now that younger generations are staying out a little bit more, and that sort of thing, people are getting a little bit. We're seeing spikes in terms of traffic in those locations. That frankly wasn't there for a few years. So we're not seeing. It used to be real traditional breakfast, then we go down, and then lunch, and then dinner, and then this. We're not seeing that anymore. You're seeing your valleys aren't as deep, and your peaks aren't quite as high, and that's due to work at home. That's due to generations not being tied to traditional day parts and having different expectations. So I think those sorts of things too they're gonna force operators to lean more into technology, whether that's automation, whether that's robotics, whether that's AI, just to help deal with that, because they need that to help understand what's coming. You made great examples earlier about, hey, when this happens, then we need more people to do this, or those are great informed decisions in terms of what's coming, what people are buying, and just how to be prepared.
Yeah, I want to add another piece of the value proposition. Something you said triggered it. The other thing is crew member safety and job satisfaction. Retention and training fall kind of into that as well. So we have people looking at high-tech investments in order to remove a lousy job from the kitchen. Okay, that's literally their value proposition, is because they realize if they can take that job out of the kitchen, their ability to retain people and make it a more satisfying place to work and compete for labor goes up, right? So they're actually investing in some of this higher technology in order to remove those difficult jobs, or bad to do jobs, right? Picture your hands on a cold piece of protein breading for 8 hours, and you're trying to keep it below food safe temperatures, and you're working on that, and that's your job. That's a difficult job. That's probably one that can disappear from an automation perspective. Another one is safety, okay? So it was actually a customer here in Texas who shared this with us, this perspective, but we've used this technology to do drive-through automation. So we're actually building systems. Again, you can see that on our website, or we had it at NRA if you happen to wander by. But this is a system that actually allows you, with the same person feeding a drive-through window, we can now take it up and over and serve it to a car. It's reacting to the height of the car. I always say that my 1972 Chevy pickup and Chad's Porsche are at a different height. It reacts to Chad's Porsche, or there's two Chads, so Chad's it's a Corvette. In Chad's case, but it can actually react to that, adjust to that, feed the customer. It can reorder on the fly. There's all sorts of things like that we can do, and we believed in that from an operational efficiency, that we had a really good idea here. Well, we had a customer who said, "You're missing the boat." Okay, and by the way, this was Waterbury. Okay, and we said, "What? What? We've got the value, but no safety." So, what safety? And they said, "It's 2:00 in the morning. We're still open. And I got somebody driving up to that window who knows what they've been doing. And I've got them in a bad neighborhood, okay? You've just given me the ability to insulate the crew member from that exchange." He said, "Didn't have that without this," okay? That's a huge, and they're not investing in this yet. We're working on it. But that's a huge value proposition. I don't have people running around the parking lot to deliver food. I don't have people out there on a slippery day in Chicago walking across the parking lot to get a bag to a customer, right? Yeah. It's all of that which gives us that value. So the value proposition of this technology can be driven completely outside of the labor discussion. Yeah. And like I said earlier, I think the labor discussion is more about availability of labor that can be solved. So we don't want to build that technical future on simply labor savings. I think that's a small piece of it. There's a lot of other things that we can do. Okay? Yeah.
So The question was, talking about POS, are any companies like Toast or some of the other companies in that arena, are they doing anything with AI?
Yeah. So point of sale integration is actually typically pretty simple. Okay. Point of sale have reached a level where they are communicating common languages, a handful of which can be translated to what you need, right? So it's not an overwhelming leap to say I'm going to connect to virtually any point of sale. Now that said, if somebody has a homegrown system that they're running that's 30 years old, okay, none of that counts. Okay, but chances are point of sale integration is possible. One of the things we've learned in a couple of examples is it's not always advisable. It's not always attractive. And I'll give you an example of that. We're building a machine that automatically feeds a contact toaster. So contact toasters are very common in the burger space because they caramelize the bun, keep the juices from making it soft. Really becomes important in delivery and drive-through, which is a trend. So contact toasting has increased probably in its value. We've built a machine that will automatically load a myriad of buns into that machine to automatically contact toast it. We did some testing in a restaurant. One of those tests was connected to the point of sale. One of them was not. The one that was not was far more efficient and effective than the one that was. The reason for this is the computer wasn't smart enough yet to handle the complex logistics of timing. So these sandwiches back up and the prep crew is looking at it and the sandwiches are popping out based on the point of sale while they're sitting there getting cold. The crew member, on the other hand, with a bump bar with 4 or 5 sandwiches to pick from, was able to look up at that screen, finish this sandwich, and go boom at the exact right time so that when this sandwich was wrapped, was turning to grab the next one. Okay? Net effect of that was about a 15-degree hotter sandwich getting to the drive-thru. Okay? Which is what you want. You want that hot food getting to the customer, right? So that was really interesting because in that case, I think we learned that point of sale and that translation and that communication and the control system to do what that person could do in their mind like this with a little bit of practice, this wasn't there. It wasn't worth the investment. So that's actually moving forward as a project, and it's moving forward with a manual activation of the system as opposed to automated. So you have to look at, when does that make sense, when doesn't. Doesn't always make sense. I was afraid you were going to ask me a question. Yeah. Absolutely. That's a great point. And thank you for making it a question versus a statement. But that is a great point. And that video monitoring system and the load management and the foot traffic and the things you can do with that today that's already there. That's correct. Yep. Yeah. So that's the logic, the control system, the restaurant brain of managing that. My Kroger example earlier was doing precisely that. Okay. The other thing, I flew through Houston yesterday. I was amazed at how much self-service restaurants and stores. Starbucks is 100% app. They have somebody standing there to help you download the app if you don't have it. You can't buy a Starbucks in Terminal C without the Starbucks app. The barbecue place there, that's where I had my lunch, was really good. All kiosk, 100%. Didn't talk to a person. Food came out, Dan, your order's ready. It was all over the place. There was a self-checkout bookstore. Okay. I was really, I haven't been to Houston in a while, but I was really surprised on how far they've gone with those things. So.
They would always have the Athens show last year. I didn't see it, but you guys looked like a big old pizza robot.
Right, yeah.
French fries.
Yeah.
Other things that they said, McDonald's in the Midwest really just had managers and assistants.
Right.
All the entire process.
Yeah. And there's a whole nother set of challenges in going that far, that fast. How are you going to keep it running? If I go into, so the most vertically or the most automated and integrated automobile manufacturing in the world is the Hyundai plant in Alabama today. Okay? engines to a car out the other end. It is an amazing facility with absolutely nobody. But the people that are there are all electrical engineers, high-end maintenance, and they're electrical engineers doing maintenance. They're electrical engineers troubleshooting. They have their staff is all keep this stuff running because I've made such capital investment that if it's not kicking product out the other end, I'm in trouble. But they have zero labor issues because they're only hiring the highest of professionals and they're using those people to do that. So yeah, I mean, you can go there. I don't think that's the journey we're going to see. I think we're going to see modularity. Jump in here, add this piece, add that piece, make each a business case. That's how you change. And that's how we did industry in the 80s and the 70s. Okay? So you did modularity. Eventually, you ended up with this integrated plant in Alabama. But you start, it's crawl, walk, run, right? Start crawling with this stuff. And then pick that up to a walk and then get to a run. But if you start with boiling the ocean, and we've done that a few times, haven't we, Chad? So if you start with boiling the ocean, you can get results, but you're probably not going to get success. Okay? So it's an incremental process. Think about your roadmap, where you want to be 20 years from now. And think about what the logical steps are that help your business, that make things work in the short term, but are consistent with that 20-year vision so that you don't end up redoing things because, oh, I didn't think of this. So the ideal situation is 20-year roadmap. What pieces can I do next year that actually have a return, service my customers better, make things safer, whatever the value proposition is, I'm going to do these things first. And then, but I have this vision that's guiding that so that I don't end up in Topeka thinking I was driving to New York, right? So you need that roadmap.
Okay. I think you talked a little bit too, Dan. You triggered a couple things. One of the things is that app ordering is so influential right now, and I think it gets overlooked. We're seeing a greater number of chain restaurants specifically, who are opening up drive-through only locations, or McDonald's they're opening this week in a Chicago suburb, their Cosmics operation, which is,
Yeah, saw that.
it's smaller than their typical. There is a little bit of on-premises dining, but they also have a dual drive-through lane. And why is that? Why do I bring that up? Or even Portillo's out of Chicago, what they've said is they want to grow to 900 locations. I think they have one or two down here. But if they want to grow to 900 locations, they're at about 80 right now. Of that 900, 120 would be off-premises only locations. Why? Well, it allows them to go to places that they couldn't normally go to with the bigger footprint. That's number one. Number two, when it's off-premises only, the vast majority of those orders that are coming through from app orders and orders ahead. You look at the success at Chipotle with its Chipotlanes that they have. Those stores that have Chipotlanes, and a Chipotlane is a drive-through, but you can only pick up your food there. You have to order it ahead on the app. You can't pull up and say, hey, I want a burrito. You have to order it ahead on your app. You pull up and you say, I'm Chad from A-Smart. I'm here to pick up my burrito. They'll say, great, drive to window one and they'll give it to you. They're performing significantly higher than traditional Chipotle stores. So we're going to see more of those stores, I think, particularly in the chain world, that emphasizes off-premises because it helps solve for labor, it helps automate transactions, and I think it keeps things moving just a lot faster. And I think that's a real important thing.
Don't forget, as an add-on to that, don't forget who owns those operations has a big impact on what they're doing today.
Yep.
Okay. Private equity is relatively new in our space, especially in the larger chains, and it has a profound influence on how quickly things are changing. Okay, so it has a big impact on how fast we move.
Well,
Yeah.
did you have? No. Okay. As you guys probably figured out by now, Dan and I could sit up here and talk about this all day. But we want to be respectful of your time and the other vendors that you want to see here at this event. So I want to just offer one or two closing thoughts here as we get going. You know, we're really, as an industry, we're in the infancy of dealing with artificial intelligence, IoT, automation, all the technology, the data analytics. And I really believe that we're only limited by our imagination as we move forward. I think the more you explore this with your own specific application in mind, I think there's tremendous potential. Everybody talks about innovation in terms of a green field or a blue sky kind of approach. I don't agree with that at all. I think innovation likes to be confined in a box. And my favorite example of that, if you've ever heard me speak before, I talk about this all the time, is that scene in Apollo 13. Houston, we have a problem.
Yeah.
Where he walks
Where's the
in.
duct tape?
right? He walks in and he dumps what looks like an Ace Hardware on a conference room table, and a bunch of engineers have to figure out how to create an air filtration system for him. But they did it. I think when you're working with this sort of stuff, I think you have to understand you can't chase the technology. It has to go to work for you. So you have to understand, number one, why are you doing it? What is your what do you hope to get out of this? Don't chase technology. Works for you. You don't work for it. The second thing is, don't be confined by your imagination. Really think outside the box. I think you took great first steps here today by coming to this session, asking questions, going inside and seeing those guys, going to NAFM and seeing what's available. I think there's a ton of stuff that's out there. Don't be afraid to look over the fence. Go to the Antunes website, go to my website, look at stuff. There's a ton of stuff that's happening out there. When the time is right, I think you'll figure it out. I will put in a plug that he doesn't know I'm going to say in for Antunes. Like, I went to their website, their booth at NAFTA, and that was like Xanadu. I mean, all the stuff that was going on in there, I mean, that was like some space age outer, I mean, it was wild walking through there, and it was awesome. I got a great tour. I think Chad actually might have been the guy that gave me the tour when we went through. I mean, it was impressive. So take those opportunities to learn and go see those things. And when the time is right for you guys to start rolling your stuff out, I think having that knowledge base is really going to serve you well. Anything to add in closing?
Yeah, just I want to thank everybody for their time and attention. Hopefully you got some nuggets of value here. But we're here for a while, so don't be shy. If you have a particular question you didn't ask or a conversation you want to have, we love this stuff, so you're doing us a favor to come up and talk to us and ask us our opinion on things. So we really appreciate that. And I want to thank FHW for hosting such an awesome event. This is cool. It's my first time here. It's really cool. So appreciate it. And thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Thanks. Yep.
One thing Dan shared with me was a class at MIT that is an online course that I'm looking into for us, I think, for business leaders, just to capture some knowledge. It didn't seem instructional about next steps, but really gathering the information so you can take that into your workplace.
Yeah, so that's a great plug. I think 3 of us in here have done that. Did you do it, Chad? I know, Ron, you did it. Yeah. So it's an online course. Back when I did it, it was $2,500, which with the
Not that anymore.
okay, but with the name MIT attached to it, it's a pretty good deal. And it explores with so they marry their Sloan School of Business with their engineering school, and they're able to bring real business applications and what's happening, development of all of that. So yeah, and it's all online. It's not, you do not have to be a technician to understand this. It's a business class with, you can go deeper. If you happen to be technical, you can go deeper. But yeah, thank you. There's a lot of that out there. Data analytics, University of Minnesota, I did a class there. It's really good. So there's a lot. Northwestern has an innovation seminar that they do. So there's some really good stuff. Good. Then thank you for that.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, guys, for being here. Visit the Antunes booth. There are other manufacturers here, not as advanced as what Antunes is doing just yet, but there's so much to learn. Thanks for starting the conversation.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.